Marilyn never understood how people managed to oversleep on an important day. At 5 in the morning, she was already standing at the panoramic window with a cup of herbal tea, gazing at the scattered lights of sleeping Portland. Dawn was just beginning to paint the sky in soft, pink tones. From the third floor of their mansion in Arlington Heights, they had a view of the Willamette River, where a few barges floated slowly by. She and Braxton used to sit here together in the mornings, discussing their plans for the day. Now her husband was increasingly leaving before dawn for important meetings with investors. The maid, Rosa, was already bustling about in the kitchen, setting the table for a festive breakfast. Marilyn had specifically asked for her husband's favorite omelet with truffles and asparagus. "Mrs. Maverick," Rosa hesitated, wiping the already sparkling glass. "A woman called last night asking for Mr. Braxton. I told her he'd be home late." "Thank you, Rosa." Marilyn took a sip of her lukewarm tea. It must be work. She went up to the bedroom. Braxton was still asleep, sprawled across his side of the bed. He smelled of unfamiliar perfume, too sweet, too young. He used to prefer the austere Givenchy. In the dressing room, Marilyn took out a small Patek Philippe box. She had spent a month choosing the watch, platinum, with a perpetual calendar. It cost as much as a small yacht, but Braxton deserved it. 42 was a serious age, after all. She remembered their first meeting in the small gym where she worked as an administrator. Braxton was just a trainer back then, but he had such ambition. Now they had a chain of premium fitness clubs all over the West Coast. And even though he had been doing more and more public relations work in recent years, with her doing all the actual work, it didn't matter. The main thing was that they had built it together. There was a soft knock at the door. "Come in, Rosa." "Mrs. Maverick," the chauffeur called. "Mr. Braxton asked for the car to be ready at 7. He has an early meeting." "On his birthday?" Marilyn raised an eyebrow. "Okay, I'll wake him up myself." She sat down on the edge of the bed, admiring her husband. In 20 years of marriage, he had hardly changed. Still the same athletic figure, strong jaw, only a few gray hairs at his temples. True, lately he had been frowning more often and smiling less. "Happy birthday, dear." Braxton opened his eyes and stretched sleepily. "Is it morning already? What time is it?" 6. "I made your favorite breakfast." "I'm sorry, honey, but I have to run. I have an important meeting with investors from Seattle." "At 7 in the morning? On Saturday?" "They're flying out today. You know how it is." He kissed her on the cheek and disappeared into the bathroom. Marilyn stared at the closed door. He had never missed a family breakfast before, especially on his birthday. Downstairs, Rosa was busy setting the table. The omelet was steaming and the fresh pastries smelled of cinnamon and vanilla. "Mr. Braxton won't be having breakfast?" the maid asked sadly. "No, he has a meeting." Marilyn mechanically spread butter on her toast. The sound of a car driving away came from the street. She took out her phone and opened the tracking app. The beacon, secretly attached to her husband's car, showed that he was not heading toward the business district. Well, a special gift awaited him in the evening. It was just a pity that the $100,000 watch would remain in its box. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A message from the private investigator. "The target has arrived at the specified address, starting surveillance." Marilyn smiled. Let him enjoy his holiday for now. Soon he would have no time for fun. The year 1998 was unusually rainy. Marilyn still remembered how the raindrops drummed on the roof of the Steel Fist Gym, a small facility on the outskirts of Portland where she worked as an administrator. The peeling paint on the walls, the worn-out exercise machines, the smell of bleach and sweat, all of this had been her world for the past 3 years since graduating from college. That morning she was counting memberships when the door swung open, letting in a gust of wind and a tall stranger in a worn jacket. He shook off his umbrella and smiled as if he were a regular. "Braxton Maverick," he said, holding out his hand. "I saw the ad for a coach." Marilyn remembered the ad. It had been posted a month ago after the old coach, Joe, retired. No one had applied for the job. It wasn't a very affluent neighborhood. "Any experience?" she asked, trying to sound stern, even though the stranger's hazel eyes were already making her heart beat faster. 5 years in the Army Sports Club, plus a degree in physical education. He handed her a slightly crumpled resume. Marilyn scanned the lines. His track record was impressive, especially for their modest gym. "Why here? With your experience, you could find a better place." Braxton sat down on the edge of her desk as if they were old friends. "You know what this place has in common with a rough diamond? Potential. I see opportunities here that others don't." He spoke so passionately about his vision for a modern fitness club that Marilyn found herself listening with her mouth open. There was no usual bragging in his words, only a sincere belief that he could change the world for the better, starting with a small gym. The owner of the gym, Mr. Jenkins, hired him on the spot. During the first few weeks, Marilyn watched as Braxton transformed the gym. He painted the walls himself, repaired the equipment, and created new workout programs. Customers were drawn to him. He knew how to connect with everyone. Their first date happened spontaneously. It was late in the evening and Marilyn was closing the gym when Braxton suggested they grab dinner at a pizza place across the street. "Best pizza in town," he winked. "At least that's what the sign says." The pizzeria turned out to be a tiny diner with shabby tables, but the pizza was really good and the conversation was easy. Braxton talked about his time in the Army and his dream of opening his own club, where working out would be more than just physical exercise, but a way of life. "Imagine a place where people don't just pump iron, but find themselves." His eyes lit up. "State-of-the-art equipment, professional trainers, individualized programs, a spa area, a pool, a kids' room." "Sounds expensive," Marilyn remarked, wiping her hands on a paper napkin. "Money is just a tool. The main thing is the right strategy and a team of like-minded people." He talked until the pizzeria closed, then walked her home in the drizzling rain. He paused awkwardly at the entrance, but Marilyn stood on tiptoe and kissed him. The next few months flew by like a single day. They spent all their free time together discussing plans for the future. Marilyn, with her economics degree, helped draw up a business plan. In the evenings, they sat in her small apartment surrounded by papers and numbers. They got married at the city hall, simply signing the register in the presence of a few friends. Instead of a honeymoon, they spent the money on designing a logo for their future club. Marilyn had no regrets. She believed in their shared dream. They opened their first club with a loan secured against her apartment. It was risky, but there was no other way out. Banks refused to give loans to an unknown coach. They found a place in a residential area, an old warehouse in need of major repairs. Marilyn remembered their first night there. No heating, flashlights because the electricity hadn't been connected yet. They sat on the floor, ate pizza they had ordered, and dreamed of the future. "This will be the reception area," Braxton said, shining his flashlight on the walls. "There will be a gym, and upstairs there will be studios for group classes." During the day, he did repairs and looked for clients while she learned accounting. She stayed up late into the night poring over textbooks, getting confused between debits and credits. But gradually, the numbers began to form a coherent picture. The first few months were the hardest. There were few clients and they barely had enough money to pay the loan. They saved on everything, living on grains and cheap pasta, walking everywhere to save on transportation. But gradually, things started to look up. They were saved by Braxton's idea to offer corporate programs to local companies. Their first major contract with a technology firm allowed them to pay off part of their debt and hire additional staff. Marilyn remembered the moment when she first felt that they had made it. It was a Sunday morning. She had come in early to do some reports and saw a line outside the entrance. People were standing there to sign up for a new training program developed by Braxton. That evening, they opened a bottle of cheap champagne they had been saving for a special occasion. They sat on the floor of their office, drinking from plastic cups and making plans for the future. "We're going to build a chain of clubs," Braxton said confidently, "all along the West Coast, and then maybe across the country." Marilyn smiled at her husband. At that moment, she was completely happy. Who knew that 20 years later, everything would change so much? Kylie Radford nervously adjusted her sports top in front of the mirror in the locker room at Maverick Fitness. The upscale club in the city center was a stark contrast to the small yoga studio in Tacoma, where she had been teaching for the past 3 years. Everything here exuded luxury, from the marble floors to the gold-plated faucets in the showers. She had found the job interview for a yoga instructor by chance. After her parents divorced and sold their family home in Seattle, she had to find ways to support herself and help her mother pay for their apartment. Her father had moved to Hawaii with his new wife, forgetting all about his obligations. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection as she tied her blonde hair into a high ponytail. There were 15 minutes left before the trial class began. Kylie walked into the hall, spreading her yoga mat as usual. The studio was impressive in size. A floor-to-ceiling glass wall offered a view of the city, and a decorative waterfall murmured in the corner. She began her warm-up, flowing smoothly from one pose to the next. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed a tall man in an expensive suit enter the room. He stopped at the entrance, watching her movements. "Impressive," his voice was deep and welcoming. "Braxton Maverick, club owner." Kylie blushed and hurriedly got up from the mat. "Kylie Radford, I'm here for an interview." "I know. I've seen your resume. 5 years of practice in India is impressive." "Actually, it's 6, she said, lifting her chin. She had made that up on her resume, hoping it would improve her chances of getting the job. Braxton smiled, and Kylie could tell he had seen through her lie. But instead of getting angry, he seemed intrigued. "Show me what you can do. You have 40 minutes." By the end of the trial class, all 15 students were thrilled. Kylie knew how to create a special atmosphere, combining dynamic sequences with relaxing meditation. "When can you start?" Braxton asked after class. "Tomorrow," she said, trying to hide her excitement. The first few weeks flew by in a blur. Clients were booking her classes a month in advance, and her Instagram followers were growing. For the first time, Kylie felt confident about the future. Braxton often stopped by her studio, ostensibly to check on the equipment. She caught him looking at her, attentively, studying her. Something told her that his interest was not limited to the professional sphere. At the New Year's corporate party, they had their first real conversation. Kylie was standing at the bar, sipping a non-alcoholic cocktail when he approached her. "Don't you dance?" "I prefer other types of physical activity," she said, unable to resist a flirtatious smile. They talked all evening. Braxton told her how he started out in a small hall on the outskirts of town and built his empire. His words betrayed the fatigue of a man who had achieved everything and didn't know where to go next. "What about your wife? Is she here too?" Kylie asked casually. "Marilyn doesn't like noisy parties. She prefers to work with documents," he said with a hint of bitterness in his voice. She drove home in a daze. Her grandmother had always told her not to get involved with married men. But with Braxton, she felt alive, desired, special. Their first kiss happened a month later. Kylie stayed after her evening class to practice a new set of yoga poses. Suddenly, the lights went out and only the moon illuminated the room through the panoramic windows. "I thought everyone had left," Braxton said, standing in the doorway. "I'm practicing a new routine," she said, her heart pounding. He came closer. "Want to show me?" Kylie began to slowly perform the poses, feeling his gaze on her body. When she moved into a downward dog pose, his hands rested on her waist. "Wrong technique," he said hoarsely. "Let me show you." His fingers slid over her skin, pretending to correct her posture. Kylie straightened up and found herself in his arms. "This is unprofessional," she whispered. "To hell with professionalism." His kiss was powerful, demanding. Kylie knew that once she crossed that line, there would be no turning back. But at that moment, she didn't care. Afterward, she sat in her car in the parking lot for a long time, trying to collect her thoughts. The rearview mirror reflected the windows of his office. The lights were still on. What was she doing? Destroying someone else's family? Building a career? Or just following her heart? Her phone buzzed, a message from Braxton. "Tomorrow at 8, dinner. I'll send you the address." Kylie smiled as she started the car. Whatever happened, she deserved her piece of happiness, even if she had to steal it from another woman. She didn't know then how dearly she would pay for this illusion of love. The Blue Oyster restaurant was considered one of the most prestigious in Portland. Marilyn had personally organized the festive evening. Her husband's 42nd birthday deserved something special. Vintage wines, oysters from France, live music. Everything had to be perfect. The guests began to arrive at 7. Braxton, as always, was late. An important meeting had dragged on. Marilyn accepted congratulations from her business partners, trying not to notice their sympathetic glances. Everyone in their circle already knew about her boss's affair with the young instructor. "Sorry I'm late, darling." Braxton appeared in the hall, beaming with a white-toothed smile. He smelled of a familiar sweet perfume. 15 minutes later she entered. Kylie Redford, the rising star of yoga. A black cocktail dress accentuated her slender figure, and her light hair was styled in an elegant hairdo. "Happy birthday, Mr. Maverick." Her voice trembled with excitement. "Thank you for inviting me. You are a valuable employee of our company," Braxton replied, lingering a moment longer than necessary. Marilyn raised her glass of champagne. "Please sit down, Miss Radford. How is your new yoga program going?" Kylie sat down at the far end of the table, nervously fiddling with her napkin. She tried not to look at the birthday boy, but her gaze kept returning to him. After the main course, it was time for gifts. Business partners gave expensive trinkets, cufflinks, ties, collectible wines. Kylie presented an elegant Buddha statuette for meditation and peace of mind. "And now for my gift," Marilyn said, taking out a blue Patek Philippe box. A murmur of admiration swept through the room. Braxton opened the case. A platinum watch caught the light from the crystal chandeliers. "This is too much," he kissed his wife on the cheek. "You spoil me." Kylie paled as she watched the scene. Her fingers clenched the glass so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The evening dragged on. Toasts were made, music played, and waiters served dessert. Kylie hardly touched her food, glancing repeatedly at the happy couple. At one point, she noticed that Braxton had left his watch on the table by the bathroom door. He always took off his jewelry before washing his hands, afraid of damaging his expensive items with water. Kylie waited until everyone was caught up in another toast and quietly grabbed the box. Her hands trembled as she hid it in her purse. "Excuse me, I have to go," she muttered, hurriedly saying goodbye. "I have to get up early tomorrow for class." Leaving the restaurant, she hailed a taxi. "To Hawthorne Bridge," she said, clutching the stolen box in her hands. Nighttime Portland was aglow with lights. The taxi stopped in the middle of the bridge. Kylie got out and walked to the railing. Below, the Willamette River was dark. "So much for family bliss," she whispered, taking out the watch. Moonlight played on the platinum case. One movement and the expensive gift flew into the dark waters. The splash was barely audible over the noise of passing cars. Kylie watched the ripples spread across the water. A strange emptiness spread through her chest. She took out her phone and opened the messages from Braxton. "You're the only one who makes me happy," he had written a week ago. "We'll be together soon," he had promised the day before yesterday. "I only love you," he had repeated this morning. Lies, all lies. She had seen how he looked at his wife, how he smiled at her, how he accepted her gift. "Damn you, Braxton Maverick," Kylie whispered, wiping away her tears. Her phone vibrated in her purse. It was his number. She dismissed the call and blocked his number. In the morning, she would teach her class as usual. She would smile at her clients. She would greet her colleagues. No one would know what she had done. And the watch would remain at the bottom of the river, a symbol of broken hopes and empty promises. The taxi was already waiting to take her home. Tomorrow would be a new day. And she would try to forget this evening as if it were a bad dream. But somewhere deep down, Kylie knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Braxton gave Kylie the keys to his apartment in the Pearl District a week after the incident with the watch. "We need a place to meet," he said, kissing her neck. The apartment was a 2-story place with a view of the river and designer furniture. "This is too much," Kylie said, looking around, amazed at the size. "How much does it cost to rent a place like this?" "Don't worry about it," Braxton dismissed her. "You deserve better." That night, he stayed over for the first time. In the morning, he called a cleaning service and a florist. The entire first floor was filled with white roses. "This is just the beginning," he promised. A month later, a brand new Mercedes with a red bow on the hood was waiting for her in the club parking lot. "I can't accept a gift like this," Kylie protested. "You can," Braxton said, placing the keys in her palm. And that's not all. The gifts kept coming. Diamond earrings from Cartier, a Birkin bag, a Rolex watch. Each time, he insisted that she deserved the best. "When are you going to tell her?" Kylie asked, lying in his arms in their secret hideaway. "Soon," he promised. "We have to choose the right moment. Marilyn has been managing the company's finances for so many years. It won't be easy." Their business trips became regular weekends in San Francisco, Las Vegas, Vancouver. Braxton booked the best rooms, took her to Michelin-starred restaurants, showered her with compliments. "Can you imagine how we'll live when this is all over?" he whispered. "We'll buy a house on the coast. We'll wake up to the sound of the waves." Kylie believed him. She introduced him to her friends as her future husband. They were surprised by her sudden wealth, but she explained it away with her successful career at Maverick Fitness. "He's getting divorced," she told her friend Ashley. "He just needs time to sort out the formalities." Ashley shook her head. "Be careful. Stories like that rarely end well." But Kylie didn't listen. She was intoxicated by love and the luxury of her new life. When Braxton offered her the position of creative director for a new chain of yoga studios, she accepted without hesitation. "You'll have to travel a lot," he explained. "Check out new locations, train staff. All expenses paid by the company, of course." Her first corporate flight in business class, her first 5-star hotel on a business trip, it all seemed like a fairy tale. She didn't ask where the money for these expenses came from. "The company is thriving," Braxton replied to her rare questions. "You're making us money. You deserve to be treated accordingly." In the evenings in their apartment, they made plans. He showed her designs for future studios, asked her advice on the design, and discussed marketing strategies. "You'll be the face of the brand," he said. "Young, successful, inspiring, just what the company needs." Kylie didn't notice how she signed documents without looking. Contracts, invoices, bills. She trusted him unconditionally. "It's standard procedure," Braxton explained. "Just a formality." Only sometimes, late at night when he left to go home to his wife, she was overcome with doubts. But in the morning, he would send her a new gift or arrange a surprise, and her fears would recede. "I love you," he whispered. "Soon we'll be together forever." And she believed him. She believed every word, every promise. She had no idea that she was signing her own death warrant with corporate credit cards and expense reports. Meanwhile, at Maverick Fitness headquarters, Marilyn was methodically compiling a file of evidence of corporate embezzlement. The watch thrown into the river was the last straw. She took action. But Kylie didn't know that. She was too busy trying on wedding dresses that she planned to wear when it was all over. Dresses she paid for with her corporate card, unaware that every transaction was recorded in the company's database. The first alarm bell rang in March. Marilyn was checking the quarterly reports when she came across a strange transfer, $120,000 to the Cartier jewelry boutique. She remembered clearly that no corporate gifts for partners were planned for that quarter. "Janet," she called to her husband's secretary, "what is this transaction from March 15th? Janet paled and began to rummage through the papers with trembling hands. Mr. Maverick said they were business gifts for investors from Dubai. Investors from Dubai? Marilyn raised an eyebrow. That's strange. They're not on the meeting schedule. That evening, she stopped by Cartier. The young saleswoman recognized her immediately. Mrs. Maverick was a regular customer, after all. Yes, your husband chose a beautiful set, the girl chirped. Diamond earrings and a necklace. Very romantic. Marilyn kept her expression impassive. Do you remember the date of purchase? March 15th. He paid for it right away with his corporate card. In the car, Marilyn took out her phone and opened her calendar. March 15th was the birthday of that very same yoga instructor. Over the next few weeks, she methodically checked all of the company's expenses. Expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, business-class airline tickets. Everything was written off as business development and business trips. Miss Radford is auditing new locations, Braxton explained at meetings. She's our creative director. Creative director. A 27-year-old yoga instructor with no relevant education. In early April, Marilyn stayed late at the office. Braxton had left his phone on the table when he left for an urgent meeting. The screen lit up with a message. I miss you. The apartment feels empty without you. Love, your K. Marilyn slowly put down the phone. She had suspected he was cheating, but seeing the proof was something else entirely. The next day, she called Janet into her office. I know you're covering for him, she said calmly. Now you have two choices. Either you tell me everything or you find a new job. Janet burst into tears. It turned out that Braxton had rented an apartment in the Pearl District and put it in the company's name. All the bills, all the expenses, everything went through the corporate budget. He said it was for important clients, the secretary sobbed. I didn't know. You did, Marilyn interrupted her. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that you helped me gather all the documents. That evening, she sat in her home office, sorting papers into piles. Embezzlement of corporate funds, abuse of office, fictitious positions. The list of charges grew by the hour. Honey, are you still up? Braxton peeked into the study. He smelled of his familiar sweet cologne. Working, she smiled. I have a lot to do. When the door closed behind him, Marilyn took out the business card of a corporate litigation lawyer. Enough playing the blind wife. It was time to take action. After all, she had built this company, and she knew every line in every document. Braxton had become too caught up in his game of being the generous lover, forgetting who was really in charge. We'll see, honey, she whispered as she dialed the lawyer's number. We'll see how you get out of this one. Marilyn found a private investigator through old connections. Harold Wainate, a former police officer, specialized in corporate espionage and marital infidelity. His office was located in an inconspicuous building on the outskirts of town. Classic story, Harold grunted as he looked through the documents provided. Rich husband, young mistress, corporate money. But you did the right thing coming to me. Everything needs to be documented legally. A week later, the first batch of photos was on Marilyn's desk. Braxton and Kylie at the entrance to a restaurant, in the park, at that very apartment in the Pearl District. They meet 3 or 4 times a week, the detective reported. He pays for everything with a corporate card. Here, for example, is a bill from Le Pigeon Restaurant, $400 for dinner. Marilyn methodically sorted the documents into folders. Every check, every transaction, every photograph, everything could be useful in court. John, she called her college friend, now a successful corporate litigation lawyer. We need to meet. Confidential. They met at an exclusive wine club that served the finest Bordeaux and never asked unnecessary questions. The situation is serious, John said, looking through the documents. Embezzlement, abuse of office, fictitious employment. How much are the total expenses? Over $1 million in the last year, Marilyn sipped her wine. Apartment, car, jewelry, travel, all through the company. And this girl, Kylie Radford, does she realize she's involved in financial fraud? I doubt it. Braxton always knew how to pull the wool over people's eyes. The next step was to check the apartment. Harold got hold of copies of the lease agreement. Everything was registered through a shell company, but the payments were coming from the corporate account. $3,000 a month, Marilyn calculated, plus utilities, maintenance, designer furniture. She went to see the place, a luxurious condominium with a view of the river, security, underground parking, concierge service, a typical love nest for a wealthy, married man. I need the surveillance camera footage, she told the detective. I'm already working on it, Harold replied. But there's something more interesting. Take a look at these documents. It turned out that Braxton wasn't just spending company money. He had created an entire scheme involving fictitious consulting services. Kylie was listed as creative director with a salary of $20,000 a month, plus bonuses and entertainment expenses. Perfect, Marilyn smiled. Now we have everything. She took out her favorite leather folder, a gift from Braxton on their 15th wedding anniversary. How symbolic it would be to use it for divorce papers. What's next? John asked at their next meeting. Next, we wait. Marilyn was calm. Let them think everything is going according to plan, and then she took out the last document, the agreement transferring control of the company. Braxton had signed it a month ago without looking, as usual, trusting his wife with all the boring formalities. You know, she smiled, it's funny. He always said I paid too much attention to paperwork. Now these papers will be his personal hell. Harold continued to send reports, photos, videos, financial documents. The folders were bulging with evidence. Ready to move? John asked a month later. Marilyn looked at the last photo, Braxton kissing Kylie at the entrance to their love nest. Almost, she replied. Just one small detail left. She took out the receipt from the jewelry store, the very watch that had been thrown into the river. How ironic that this impulsive act by her lover would be the last straw. It's time to teach him a lesson, Marilyn whispered as she closed the folder, and it will be a very, very expensive one. The office of Sterling and Partners smelled of leather and expensive coffee. Marilyn sat in a spacious office surrounded by 3 of the best corporate lawyers on the West Coast. The situation is ambiguous. Robert Sterling tapped his fingers on the table. On the one hand, we have clear evidence of embezzlement of corporate funds. On the other hand, your husband is officially the CEO of the company. Not exactly. Marilyn took out a folder with documents. A month ago, he signed over all his powers to me. Here, take a look. The lawyers leaned over the papers. The document was flawlessly drafted, not a single loophole to contest. How did you manage that? Asked Sarah Chang, a family law specialist. Braxton never reads documents. Marilyn allowed herself a slight smile. I've been doing all the paperwork for 20 years. He's just used to signing whatever I give him. The following weeks turned into a legal marathon. Marilyn secretly transferred company assets to new accounts, created reserve funds, and made 3 copies of every important document. The main thing is to act strictly according to the law, Sterling instructed. No emotional decisions. Everything must be legally flawless. Marilyn worked at night while Braxton slept. She created new companies, reworded contracts, and laid the groundwork for the inevitable breakup. "What about the real estate?" Sarah asked at another meeting. "Everything is registered to the company," Marilyn said, laying out the documents. "The house, offices, fitness centers. Technically, it's corporate property, and the company now belongs to me." They developed a clear strategy. First, an official notification to the board of directors about the embezzlement. Then, Braxton's temporary removal from management. And finally, a lawsuit. "What about the mistress?" asked the third lawyer, who specialized in criminal law. "Miss Radford was paid for a fictitious position," Marilyn showed the pay slips. "Plus, she used corporate cards for personal purposes. Formally, this is complicity in financial fraud." Every step had been calculated, every action documented. Marilyn had created a special safe deposit box at the bank where copies of all the documents were kept. "What if he tries to contest the transfer of power?" asked Sterling. "He can't," Marilyn said, pulling out a video recording. "Here he is signing the documents, voluntarily, of sound mind and memory." She had thought of everything, from freezing corporate accounts to banning him from leaving the country. Every legal document was drafted to leave Braxton no chance of escape. "You realize this will destroy him?" Sarah asked gently. "He destroyed everything himself," Marilyn said calmly. "I'm just putting the paperwork in order." The final touch was a letter to the tax authorities, an anonymous report of possible violations in the company's financial statements. "Now we just have to wait?" Sterling asked at the final meeting. "Almost." Marilyn took out another document. "Just one last signature, the divorce papers." She carefully signed her name, admiring her calligraphic handwriting. 20 years of marriage fit into a few lines of legal text. "You know," she looked at the lawyers, "it's funny. He always said I was too pedantic, too attentive to detail, and now those details will be his undoing." Marilyn closed the folder with the documents. The deed was done. All that remained was to choose the moment for the final blow. "Are you ready?" Sterling asked. "More than ready," she smiled. "It's time to teach him a lesson about the importance of reading documents carefully." After all, she had always been the better financier of the two of them. Braxton had simply forgotten that, carried away by his young mistress and his beautiful life. Well, soon he would have to remember who had really built the Maverick fitness empire. And that memory would be very, very painful. Kylie began to notice the first warning signs in mid-May. Braxton, usually so attentive and generous with compliments, became distracted and nervous. He canceled their dates more and more often at the last minute. "Sorry, baby." His voice sounded tense on the phone. "Urgent meeting with investors. I'll make it up to you tomorrow." But tomorrow turned into the day after tomorrow, and then next week. Their cozy dinners in their apartment overlooking the river became fewer and fewer. That evening, she was waiting for him with particular impatience. She had cooked his favorite steak and opened an expensive bottle of wine. But instead of Braxton, she received a short message. "I can't make it. Problems have come up." Kylie looked at the cooling dinner. He had always found time for her, even on his busiest days. What had changed? The gifts had also become more modest. Instead of jewelry from Cartier, she received bouquets of flowers. Instead of spontaneous trips to Vegas, there were quick meetings during lunch breaks. "Just a difficult period in business," he explained. "We need to be more careful with our spending." Once, she accidentally overheard his phone conversation in the club hallway. Yes, I understand the seriousness of the situation. His voice trembled. No, these transactions were agreed upon. Of course, I have the documents. Listen, let's discuss this in person. When he noticed her, he quickly ended the conversation and smiled awkwardly. Everything okay? Kylie asked. Sure, honey, just work stuff. But she could see his hands shaking as he put his phone back in his pocket. Something new had crept into their relationship, a sense of unease, of anxiety. Braxton started checking his phone more often, flinching at calls, looking around nervously in restaurants. Maybe we should take a vacation, Kylie suggested. Go somewhere together. Forget about our problems. Now's not the best time, he rubbed his temples. Too much work. You always say that. When will the right time be? When are you finally going to tell her? Kylie, please. He looked exhausted. Let's not talk about this now. When will we? In a month? A year? You promised we'd be together. We will be. We just need to wait a little longer. I'm tired of waiting. She felt tears welling up in her throat. I'm tired of being your dirty little secret. You're not a secret. He tried to hug her, but she pulled away. No? Then why do we always meet here? Why don't you ever take me to official events? Why do I have to pretend we're just colleagues? You know it's complicated. I know. I know your wife runs the company's finances. I know you're afraid of losing your business. But what about me? How much longer do I have to wait? He didn't answer. He just took out his phone and nervously checked his messages again. That night, Kylie wondered for the first time if she was making a huge mistake. Maybe all this talk about a future together was just a fairy tale? In the morning, she found an envelope with money and a note in her purse. Sorry about last night. I love you. Such gestures used to seem romantic to her. Now they only caused her grief. She took out her phone and opened their correspondence. Hundreds of messages with declarations of love, promises of eternity, plans for the future. Why did all these words seem so empty now? The mirror reflected a beautiful young woman with expensive jewelry and a designer bag, the mistress of a rich, married man, a classic story that never ends well. What have I done with my life? Kylie whispered, staring at her reflection. But it was too late. She didn't know that all of Braxton's strange behavior was just the beginning. A real storm was brewing. Marilyn always believed that in business, as in chess, the winner is the one who thinks several moves ahead. The last week before the decisive blow required special care. First, she arranged a meeting with the company's main partners. Lunch at the exclusive Arlington Club went exactly as she had planned. Gentlemen, Marilyn put down her cutlery. I'm afraid we have some serious problems with our financial statements. I've discovered some discrepancies. James Hawthorne, their partner since the company's inception, frowned. How serious? Serious enough to interest the tax authorities. She methodically presented the facts and showed the documents. The partners exchanged glances. No one wanted to risk their reputation because of Braxton's stupidity. What do you suggest? Hawthorne asked. Temporarily remove him from management until we conduct an internal audit. They agreed unanimously. After all, Marilyn had always been the brains of the operation. The next item on the agenda was the bankers. The meeting at First National dragged on for 3 hours. Mrs. Maverick, the bank manager, wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. These are serious allegations. These are not allegations, Mr. Parker. These are facts, she said, placing a folder of documents on the table. And I want all corporate accounts frozen except for the main operating account. But your husband, he no longer has signing authority. Here are the documents transferring his powers. Parker studied the papers and checked with his lawyers. Everything was in order. That evening she called an emergency board meeting. Without Braxton, of course. He was at an important meeting with Kylie. The situation is critical, Marilyn turned on the projector. Over the past year, more than $1 million has been withdrawn through shell accounts. The board members looked at the graphs and tables. The evidence was irrefutable. We all risk being investigated, she paused, unless we take immediate action. The vote was unanimous. The board supported the temporary suspension of the CEO. In her office, Marilyn checked the documents one last time. The divorce papers, financial reports, photographs, recorded conversations. Everything was ready. She opened the safe and took out an old photograph of her and Braxton on their first day at a tiny gym. Young, happy, full of hope. "You chose this," she whispered, tearing up the picture. Her phone rang. A message from the detective. Braxton and Kylie had just entered Le Pigeon restaurant, another romantic dinner on the company's tab. Marilyn dialed her lawyer's number. "We're starting tomorrow." She walked over to the window. Below, the evening lights of Portland shone brightly, the city where they had built their empire, the city where that empire would collapse. "You know, dear," she said into the empty office, "you always said I think too much, plan too much, check too much. Well, tomorrow you'll see how important it is." She closed the last folder. 20 years of marriage, thousands of documents, hundreds of betrayals. Everything was ready for the final act. Tomorrow, their lives would change forever. And she, damn it, would make sure this story had the right ending. Marilyn smiled at her reflection in the window. It was time to teach a lesson about the price of betrayal, and that lesson would be very, very expensive. The morning began as usual. Marilyn told the maid to set breakfast in the conservatory, Braxton's favorite place. Fresh croissants, farm eggs, freshly squeezed orange juice. The last family breakfast had to be perfect. "Darling," she kissed her husband on the cheek, "we need to talk about business." Braxton barely glanced at her, checking his phone. "Maybe later? I have a meeting at 9. "No, it's urgent, and meetings are canceled today." Something in her tone made him wary. He looked up from his phone, truly seeing his wife for the first time in a long time. "What's going on?" Marilyn took out the first folder. "Let's start with the financial report for the last quarter. I'm particularly interested in these transactions." She spread the documents out on the table. Braxton paled when he recognized the receipts from the jewelry store. Those are business expenses, gifts for partners." "Really?" Marilyn opened her laptop. "Then explain this." Photos appeared on the screen. Braxton presenting Kylie with a diamond necklace in a restaurant, the very same set from Cartier. "Have you been following me?" His voice trembled with anger. "No, dear. I was protecting the company's interests, and this is what I found." The next folder contained documents for renting an apartment in the Pearl District, bills for furniture, designer renovations, utility bills, all paid for with corporate accounts. "It's not what you think." "Oh, I know exactly what it is. Embezzlement of corporate funds on a particularly large scale, a criminal offense, by the way." She methodically laid out the evidence. Restaurant bills, airline tickets, hotel receipts, corporate credit card statements. "You know what surprises me the most?" Marilyn shook her head. "It's not even the cheating. It's your stupidity. Did you really think I wouldn't notice these expenses?" Braxton jumped up. "You wouldn't dare. This is my company." "Not anymore," she said, pulling out the power of attorney document. "Remember, you signed this a month ago, without even reading it, as usual." He grabbed the papers and scanned the text, his face contorted in horror. "You can't. I'll take you to court." "Of course you can," Marilyn was calm. "But first you'll have to explain to the tax authorities where these transactions came from, and to the board of directors where $1 million of corporate money went, and to the police how you created a fictitious position for your mistress." She took out the last folder. "And here's the divorce papers. You can study it. My lawyers have tried to make it as comprehensive as possible." Braxton collapsed into a chair. "What do you want?" "For starters, your resignation. Voluntary and public. then a quick and quiet divorce, and finally, a complete severance of all ties with the company. And in return, I won't file a police report, and I'll let you keep at least some of your reputation. What about Kylie? His voice faltered. Oh, don't worry. Your girl will also have to answer for her complicity in financial fraud. Although her inexperience may work in her favor, the prosecutor may consider her a victim of your manipulation. Marilyn took out a pen. You have an hour to think about it. Then I'll call a board meeting. You planned this all along, he said, looking at her with a mixture of fear and admiration. From the very beginning. No, dear. I was just doing my job, keeping track of the documents. It was your greed and stupidity that ruined everything. She stood up from the table. By the way, how do you like the watch? The one your mistress threw into the river? Do you know how much her impulsive act cost us? Braxton was silent, staring at the documents in front of him. His empire was crumbling before his eyes. 1 hour, Marilyn reminded him. Then I'll take action. And believe me, you won't like the consequences. She left the conservatory, leaving her husband alone with the evidence of his betrayal. Lawyers and board members were waiting for her in her office. Her phone vibrated, a message from the detective. Kylie had just entered the main office building. She had come to work, unaware that it was her last day at the company. Let's get started, Marilyn commanded, dialing the security number. It was time to end this story, and she would make sure that the ending was worthy of all the years wasted and hopes dashed. After all, revenge is a dish best served cold, and she had waited a very, very long time for this moment. Braxton Maverick never thought he'd find himself in the reception area of his own company, waiting to meet with a third-rate lawyer. All of Portland's leading law firms had turned him down. Marilyn had somehow managed to talk to all of them. Mr. Maverick? The young lawyer respectfully opened the door. Please come in. The small office smelled of cheap air freshener. How things had changed in just 1 week. Not long ago, he had been meeting clients in a spacious office overlooking the river. I've reviewed the documents, the lawyer said, nervously adjusting his glasses. I'm afraid the situation is complicated. How complicated? The transfer of authority is flawless. You voluntarily signed all the papers. I didn't read them. Braxton slammed his fist on the table. She slipped them in with the usual documents. That doesn't matter. The lawyer backed away. You are the CEO of a public company. Signing documents without reading them is criminal negligence. Braxton leaned back in his chair. He had aged 10 years in the last few days. Dark circles had formed under his eyes, and his stubble had turned completely gray. What about the corporate cards? All accounts have been frozen. What's more? The lawyer hesitated. There is evidence of company funds being used for personal purposes. Those were entertainment expenses. An apartment for your mistress, jewelry, private flights. The lawyer shook his head. Any court would classify that as embezzlement. Leaving the office, Braxton found that his parking space was taken. The security guard politely explained that management's instructions had changed. At a bar across the street, he tried to pay with his corporate card. Declined. His personal accounts were also blocked. At the request of the tax authorities. Bitch. He threw his phone against the wall of his hotel room. Marilyn had even blocked his personal credit card. Kylie's call caught him off guard. What's going on? Her voice was shaking. They wouldn't let me into the office. They said I was fired. Baby, don't worry. I'll take care of everything. How? All my cards are blocked, and I got a notice from the tax office this morning. He tried to calm her down, but he already knew the game was up. In the evening, he decided to call Marilyn. Let's talk. His voice sounded unusually pitiful. We can fix everything. It's too late, she said calmly. Tomorrow, the board of directors will consider your dismissal. I recommend you accept it with dignity. Please, 20 years of marriage. which you traded for a young instructor. By the way, how is she? Has she figured out what you've gotten her into? The next day, his personal belongings were delivered to a hotel. Security wouldn't even let him into the lobby of the main office. His phone was ringing off the hook. Journalists, partners, old friends. Everyone wanted to know the details of the scandalous dismissal of the CEO of Maverick Fitness. Temporary difficulties, he repeated like a mantra. A minor misunderstanding. But when the local news aired a story about possible financial fraud at the company that evening, he knew it was over. Kylie was no longer answering her phone. Her Instagram had been deleted, her phone turned off. In the hotel bar, he leafed through the documents sent to him by Marilyn's lawyers. Every page was saturated with poison, detailed descriptions of embezzlement, copies of checks, photographs. "More whiskey," he muttered to the bartender. "I'm sorry, sir. Your card has been declined." Braxton sat in the dimly lit bar, staring at his reflection in the mirror behind the counter. When did it all go wrong? When had he lost control? His phone buzzed, a message from Marilyn. "Tomorrow at 10, we're signing the divorce papers. Don't be late." He finished his whiskey. Maybe if he had read the papers more carefully, if he hadn't been so sure he was untouchable, but it was too late for regrets. The empire they had built together was crumbling, and he himself had laid the first stone in its destruction. His phone rang in his pocket. It was the tax office. A new act in this drama was beginning, and he already knew that the ending would be merciless. The morning began with a call from Ashley. "Turn on channel 23, right now." Kylie reached for the remote, not understanding her friend's panic. The familiar Maverick Fitness logo flashed on the screen, followed by the headline, "Financial Scandal at the Largest Fitness Club Chain." According to preliminary data, the amount embezzled exceeds $1 million, the anchor reported. The company's CEO, Braxton Maverick, has been suspended from his duties. The phone fell from her trembling hands. The screen showed photos of her and Braxton leaving a restaurant, getting into a car, entering an apartment. "Kylie?" Ashley's voice sounded alarmed. "Are you there?" The doorbell rang. Two men with official badges stood at the door. "Miss Radford? We are bailiffs. We have a warrant to seize property purchased with funds from Maverick Fitness." They methodically described every item: jewelry, handbags, watches. They even took the car right out of the parking lot. "But these are gifts," she tried to explain. "Personal gifts, purchased with corporate funds," the bailiff replied dryly. "Here is a list of transactions." Kylie looked at the long columns of numbers. Every gift, every dinner, every trip, everything had been paid for with company cards. Braxton's phone was not answering. The office greeted her with a blocked pass and a cold stare from the security guard. "Miss Radford?" An elegant woman in a suit approached from behind. "I'm Marilyn Maverick. We need to talk." Marilyn's office was the epitome of power. Panoramic windows, antique furniture, immaculate order. "Have a seat," she said, pointing to a chair. "Would you like some coffee?" "Where's Braxton?" "Probably meeting with his lawyers," Marilyn smiled. "He's got a lot of legal problems right now." She pulled out a folder. "You know what's in here? Documents about your fictitious employment. $20,000 a month for a job that doesn't exist. Not bad for a yoga instructor." "I didn't know." "Of course you did. You signed the documents, used the corporate cards. He said it was okay. And you believed him." Marilyn shook her head. "Or did you just not want to ask questions while he was showering you with gifts?" Kylie was silent. Memories flashed before her eyes. The luxurious apartment, the expensive restaurants, the jewelry. What happens now? With the company? We'll manage. With Braxton? He's facing dismissal and possibly criminal charges. With you? Marilyn paused. That depends on your willingness to cooperate. Cooperate? Testify. Confirm that he took advantage of your inexperience to get you involved in this scheme. Kylie felt nauseous. Everything was falling apart. Her dreams of a happy future, her wedding plans, the illusion of love. And if I refuse, then you will be tried as an accomplice. Fraud, embezzlement, forgery. Leaving the office, Kylie stood in the parking lot for a long time. Her car was gone. It had been towed away. At home, she took out the wedding dress she had bought with her corporate card, another item in the embezzlement case. Her phone was silent. Braxton disappeared as soon as the smell of burning hit the air. No calls, no messages, he just vanished. On the table lay their last photo together, a romantic dinner at Le Pigeon. Now she knew that dinner had also been paid for with company money. "I'm such a fool," Kylie whispered, tearing up the photo. "What a fool you are." In the morning, she called Marilyn's lawyer. It was time to face the truth and start saving what could still be saved. After all, she was just another silly girl who believed in a fairy tale about a handsome prince, which turned out to be a story of financial fraud and broken hearts. "Scandal in the fitness empire, sex, lies, and corporate money," screamed the headline of the Portland Tribune. The article took up the front page of the Sunday edition, with photos of everyone involved in the drama. It was the talk of the fitness community. Instructors whispered in the locker rooms, clients exchanged gossip between sets. "I always knew there was something wrong with that Kylie," said Doris, a veteran Pilates instructor. "How does a simple trainer have designer bags?" "And remember how she became creative director out of nowhere?" her colleague chimed in. "Now we know what her qualifications were." Social media was flooded with screenshots of Kylie's old posts, photos of expensive gifts, vacations, romantic dinners. Each photo was now accompanied by scathing comments. The phones at Maverick Fitness headquarters were ringing off the hook. Clients demanded explanations, partners terminated contracts, and journalists hunted for details. "We are conducting an internal investigation," the company's press secretary repeated. "All those responsible will be held accountable." Braxton tried to save face. He gave interviews to business publications, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. But his polished appearance had lost its luster, and his expensive suits no longer fit so perfectly. The trial began on Wednesday. Janet, the secretary, was the first to testify. "Yes, Mr. Maverick asked me to record all expenses as entertainment," she said, nervously fingering her handkerchief. The apartment was listed as an office for negotiations. Next was the administrator of the building in the Pearl District. "They came almost every day," he said. "Everyone knew she was his mistress, but the company was paying, so we didn't ask any questions." The CFO presented a detailed report on the embezzlement. The figures were staggering. More than $300,000 was spent on jewelry alone. Kylie appeared in court on the fourth day, pale, in a modest gray suit, no trace of her former luxury. "He said it was normal practice," her voice trembled, "that all executives use corporate funds." Braxton sat with his head down. Every word from his former mistress drove another nail into the coffin of his career. Marilyn was the last to speak, calm, composed, impeccably dressed. "I discovered discrepancies in the reports," she said clearly and confidently. "As the company's CFO, I was obligated to investigate." The press reveled in the details. Every day brought new revelations. Every court hearing became a sensation. "The fall of a fitness industry titan," wrote the newspapers. "How love for a young instructor destroyed an empire," echoed the magazines. Braxton stopped appearing in public. He was only seen at the bar of the hotel where he was staying, haggard, unshaven, with a glass of whiskey in his trembling hand. Clients began to cancel their contracts en masse. The company's shares plummeted. Partners distanced themselves. Old friends did not answer their phones. "How quickly everything can fall apart," remarked one of the lawyers. 20 years to build a reputation, and just 1 month to destroy it." Marilyn watched the events unfold in silence. She knew this was only the beginning. Ahead lay a tax audit, a criminal case, endless court hearings. Meanwhile, the city reveled in the scandal, relishing every detail of the story of greed, betrayal, and retribution. It was a story that would become part of local lore as an example of how every decision has a price, and sometimes that price is exorbitant. A year later, Marilyn stood at the same panoramic window in the Maverick Fitness headquarters, gazing at the evening lights of Portland. On the table lay the latest issue of Business Weekly with her photo on the cover, the woman who saved the fitness empire. After the scandal, the company underwent a major transformation. Marilyn carried out a complete rebranding, replaced the management, and introduced a strict financial control system. The stock slowly but surely crept upward. Braxton disappeared from the city immediately after the trial. Rumor had it that he had moved to Florida, where he was trying to open a small gym. The tax authorities were still sending inquiries about his whereabouts. The last time Marilyn saw him was at the signing of the divorce papers. He looked 10 years older, wearing a wrinkled suit that was past its prime. "You planned this all along," he said then. "From the very beginning." "No," she replied. "I was just doing my job. You ruined everything." Kylie unexpectedly found her place in life. After the scandal, she moved to a small town in Oregon, where she opened a modest yoga studio. No luxury or pretension, just a place for practice and meditation. "You know," she said in her only interview with the local newspaper, "sometimes losing everything is the beginning of something real." Her testimony helped her avoid criminal prosecution. The prosecutor considered her more a victim of circumstances than an accomplice. Marilyn sometimes looked through old photos, her and Braxton in their first dance hall, the opening of their first club, happy moments from their 20-year marriage. "Do you have any regrets?" her lawyer and longtime friend John asked her once. "What, that I defended the company, or that I didn't turn a blind eye to the betrayal?" She learned to live alone. She threw herself into her work, got involved in charity work, and started a program to support women in business. The company was thriving. A new line of clubs, innovative training programs, strict financial discipline. Everything was running like clockwork. In Portland business circles, her story became legendary. She was discussed at business forums as an example of the importance of controlling finances and staying vigilant. Marilyn converted the old winter garden in their former home into a home office. Here, surrounded by greenery and flowers, she often worked in the evenings. "You know what's funny?" she said to her reflection in the window one day. "He was so afraid of losing control of the company that he ended up losing everything." The phone rang on the table, another journalist asking for an interview. The story was still of interest. "How did you manage to survive the betrayal?" they asked. "I just remembered the main thing," she replied. "In business, as in life, there is no room for sentimentality. There are only facts, figures, and consequences." She never looked for a new relationship. The company became her true love, demanding but rewarding. Braxton sometimes sent letters asking for forgiveness and suggesting they meet. They went unanswered. Kylie once sent a postcard. "Thank you for not destroying me completely. I learned a lot." Marilyn kept it in the same leather folder where she had once collected evidence of their affair. Life went on. The company grew. And the story of how love for a young instructor destroyed the career of a successful businessman became a warning to anyone who thought that money and power gave them the right to act with impunity. Evening Portland was aglow with lights. Marilyn looked at the city that had witnessed so many ups and downs, the city where she had lost her husband but found herself. Sometimes, she thought, You have to lose everything to understand who you really are. And the watch, thrown into the river, remained at the bottom, a silent reminder that every story has its price, and sometimes that price turns out to be unexpectedly high.